In 1975, a 24-year-old engineer at Kodak built the first digital camera. His bosses were amazed, then ordered him to hide it. Nearly 4 decades later, that invention would help drive Kodak into bankruptcy. How could a breakthrough become a company's downfall? And what happened to the young engineer who dared to imagine film's demise? Rochester, New York, 1975. Kodak is king of the photography world. A Kodak moment means a memory captured on film, and business is booming. In a secret lab, a young electrical engineer named Steven Sasson is tinkering with a new electronic sensor called a CCD, charge-coupled device. His task? Figure out if this device can capture an image without using any film at all. Sasson scavenges parts from wherever he can. An 8mm lens from a junked Kodak movie camera, 16 nickel-cadmium batteries wired together for power, and an analog-to-digital converter ripped from a voltmeter. The result is a strange boxy contraption about the size of a toaster, weighing nearly 8 pounds. It has a cassette tape deck grafted to its side, not to play music, but to store photographs. In December 1975, Sasson's homemade camera whirs to life. He aims it at a lab technician named Joy Marshall and snaps a portrait, the world's first ever digital photo of a person. There's no click of a shutter, no spool of film winding. Instead, the device captures light on an electronic sensor and begins recording data onto the cassette. It takes 23 seconds to save a single image. Sasson hooks the cassette into a custom playback machine he built, which reads the data and displays the picture on a standard TV. The result flickers onto the screen in black and white. It's far from HD, just 10,000 pixels, 0.01 megapixels total. In fact, the first attempt is barely recognizable. Her hair was a silhouette and her face was a blur of static, Sasson recalls of that maiden digital photo. After some tweaking, the image becomes just clear enough to make out Joy's face. It's a humble start, but a revolutionary one. Photography with no film at all. Sasson and his team know the image quality is limited in 1975. They joke that the prototype's resolution is equivalent to a lousy home TV, or maybe a cheap Instamatic camera, at best. But they also know technology is improving fast. The vision is there. A camera that captures pictures as data to be viewed on screens. Sasson dubs it filmless photography for an internal demonstration. He's both nervous and excited as he sets up a show and tell for Kodak's management. Would they see its world-changing potential, or just a noisy black and white toy? Sasson is about to present his clunky digital camera to some of the most powerful men in the film business. He has no idea if they'll applaud him or laugh him out of the room. In early 1976, Sasson wheels his prototype into a Kodak conference room. The blue and silver box with wires and circuits exposed certainly doesn't look like the sleek cameras Kodak sells. It's more like a science fair project. He begins his demo by photographing one of the executives, then asks everyone to wait. 23 seconds of humming and crunching sounds later, a ghostly image appears on a television screen, the first digital portrait these Kodak higher-ups have ever seen. Sasson explains how it works. No film, just electrons and bits. The room goes quiet. Finally, the questions start. Why would anyone want to view a photo on a TV? Who would print these images? Where would you store them? In 1976, these are bewildering concepts. Remember, there are no personal computers yet, no internet, not even VCRs in most homes. The idea of an electronic photo album makes the managers furrow their brows. Then comes the big question. When might this be ready for consumers? Sasson, just 25 and earnest, pauses. Given Moore's law and the rate of innovation, he ventures a guess. 15 to 20 years. The executives exchange looks. That kind of timeline feels like science fiction. Kodak is making hefty profits right now selling film by the truckload. A technology that won't pay off until the 1990s. It's intriguing, but what's the use? According to Sasson, one company leader finally responds with a half smile. That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it. The room erupts in polite laughter. Filmless photography. A clever experiment, they concede, but not something to seriously pursue. Kodak's core business is selling film and paper after all. And this new camera of Sasson's, remarkable as it is, uses none of those. In fact, as Sasson had demonstrated, you could take a picture with his digital camera and never buy a roll of Kodak film or make a single print. To the Kodak old guard, that sounds like a threat, not a product. Why embrace a gadget that undermines the source of Kodak's riches? As one observer later put it, Kodak's profits came from selling chemicals for film. They feared digital would eat into the traditional business. Internally, a few voices at Kodak do see the potential. Sasson's boss quietly files for patents on the digital camera technology, and a handful of researchers keep refining the concepts. But there's no urgency from the top. Throughout the late 1970s and 1980s, Kodak treats Sasson's invention as a low-priority R&D project to be kept in the background. They even avoid using the Kodak name on early digital experiments, lest they undercut film. Sasson later noted with irony, "We had the technology, we just didn't have the business plan for it. We were afraid of cannibalizing film." In other words, Kodak chose to protect what it already had, their cash cow film sales, rather than risk it for a digital future that seemed a long way off. So Kodak locked away a golden innovation in a vault of corporate caution. Unbeknownst to them, competitors and upstarts outside Kodak's walls were about to take that same concept and run with it. Kodak had opened the door to the digital age, but then they slammed it shut, hoping it would all just go away. While Kodak sits on its secret, the world beyond is moving. Other inventors and companies smell opportunity in the air. Kodak's once secure empire is quietly being invaded by the very revolution it birthed. Through the late 1970s and 1980s, photography starts to change in surprising ways, largely outside Kodak's control. In 1981, Sony introduces the Mavica, an electronic still camera, though analog, not truly digital, that stores images on a mini disc. It's more prototype than product, but it sends a signal. The race for filmless photography is on. Kodak's own market research around that time actually confirms what Steve Sasson had warned. A 1981 internal study, supported by Kodak's CEO, predicts that digital technology could completely replace film in about 10 years, by the early 1990s. Kodak learns that the threat is real, but also hears some comforting news. The transition will be slow, giving them a window to adapt. The company's leadership seizes on the timeline. They think they have plenty of time. Why rush to overhaul a profitable business? For most of the 1980s, Kodak stays its course, doubling down on film and traditional cameras, while making only timid forays into digital. The digital camera prototypes remain in the lab, improving incrementally in secrecy. Meanwhile, competitors aren't waiting. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, companies like Fuji, Canon, and Nikon are pouring resources into digital imaging. Kodak, to its credit, isn't completely asleep. Its engineers continue to advance the technology quietly. In fact, in 1989, Steve Sasson and a colleague built the first modern DSLR, digital single-lens reflex camera, a bulky but fully functional digital camera with professional potential. Yet, Kodak's top brass still balk at pushing digital to market under the Kodak name. Why cannibalize our own film sales? That fear looms over every meeting. By 1992, Kodak actually has a working plan for an early consumer digital camera, a product that could have been a world's first from Kodak, but executives veto it last minute, terrified it would destroy the film business. They repeatedly kill their own digital projects or keep them spin-offish. In one instance, Kodak develops a sensor and camera that ends up launching in 1994 as the Apple QuickTake 100, one of the first consumer digital cameras, notably branded by Apple, not Kodak. Kodak's engineers built it, but the company preferred to let Apple take the spotlight and risk. The QuickTake sold modestly, but more importantly, it proved the concept. Ordinary people would buy digital cameras, even at a time when photo quality was lower than film. Other brands rapidly followed with improved models. Through the 1990s, digital photography improves exponentially. Resolution climbs from a few hundred kilopixels to 1 megapixel, 2 megapixels, and beyond. Once clunky cameras slim down, image sensors get better, storage moves from tapes to memory cards. By the turn of the millennium, You can take a decent digital photo and see it instantly on an LCD screen. No trip to the photo lab needed. Consumers are thrilled by the convenience, yet for years, Kodak's leadership remained stubbornly conflicted. They did dip a toe into the digital market, selling professional digital systems and later their own EasyShare line of consumer cameras, but always with one foot firmly stuck in the past. One former Kodak VP, Don Strickland, recalled how hard it was to get backing for digital. Kodak's leaders simply couldn't accept that digital would upend their film business until it was too late. By the time Kodak fully realized the digital market was here to stay, others had raced far ahead. Sony, Canon, Nikon, and newcomers like Olympus were dominating digital camera sales. In the mid-2000s, as digital cameras became ubiquitous, Kodak found itself playing catch-up in an arena it should have owned. A cruel irony hung in the air. Kodak, the company that had pioneered the digital camera back in 1975, was now struggling to survive in the digital era. They had seen the future coming, but tried to barricade the door. The future came through anyway. Film sales, the lifeblood of Kodak's 20th century profits, went into freefall. Consumers stopped buying film rolls and stopped printing photos en masse as digital sharing became the norm. Kodak's revenues nosedived year after year. The once mighty giant was bleeding, and the smell of decline drew in corporate predators and patent lawsuits as Kodak scrambled for lifelines. By the end of the 2000s, Kodak is on the brink. The world has gone digital without Kodak in the lead. What happens when an empire built on old technology faces its day of reckoning? At the dawn of the 21st century, Kodak, a company founded in 1888, which had dominated photography for a century, is in dire straits. The very innovation it birthed and then buried is eroding its foundations. In 2001, Kodak still posted a hefty profit from film. By 2010, those profits had all but evaporated as digital photography and smartphones devoured the market. Kodak tried to pivot, belatedly, to digital cameras and online photo services. They even had some early success selling low-cost digital cameras and docking printers in the early 2000s. But the competition was brutal, and Kodak's offerings never felt as cutting-edge as the new players. A former Kodak board member later admitted, "We had a Kodak moment, but it wasn't the good kind. We missed our moment to transition." There was a sense that innovation passed Kodak by, largely due to its own hesitation. In a cruel twist of fate, the very company that had once unveiled the first digital camera was being brought down by digital photography, largely pioneered by its rivals. In January 2012, Eastman Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, its finances shattered after years of declining film sales and unsuccessful new ventures. It was a shocking moment. An American icon that had been as integral to family memories as the Brownie camera and Kodachrome film was declaring itself insolvent. Industry observers were quick to point out the bitter irony. Kodak was the first to create the digital camera, but they were afraid to invest in it, and by the time they realized digital was king, all their competitors had better cameras. One photography expert explained. Kodak's late entry into digital meant their products lagged behind, and the brand lost its luster. As consumers started saying, "Just take an iPhone photo," the phrase Kodak moment, once joyous, became a cautionary tale in boardrooms, a warning to not let innovation pass you by. The bankruptcy marked the end of an era. Kodak began auctioning off its valuable patents to stay afloat, selling digital imaging patents to the likes of Apple, Google, and Samsung for hundreds of millions of dollars. It was a paradox. Kodak was cashing in at the bitter end on intellectual property from digital technologies it had invented years ago but never fully capitalized on. The company downsized drastically, going from 145,000 employees at its peak in the 1980s to a skeleton crew. Factories that once produced miles of film lay quiet. In Kodak's hometown of Rochester, New York, the skyline is dominated by the Kodak office tower, a grim reminder of better days. In 2013, Kodak emerged from bankruptcy as a much smaller, restructured company focused on commercial imaging. But the Kodak that generations knew, the film giant and consumer photography powerhouse, was essentially gone. Industry analysts and historians often ask, could Kodak have saved itself? Many believe the answer is yes. If only Kodak hadn't been so intent on protecting its film business at the expense of embracing the future. The decision to sideline Sassoon's digital camera in the 1970s is now cited as one of the biggest strategic mistakes in business history. Kodak's reluctance to let go of its golden goose, film, meant that it lost the golden egg of digital dominance. When the tsunami of change hit, digital cameras, then camera phones, then smartphones, Kodak was caught flat-footed. As one professor put it bluntly, Kodak has been obliterated by the creative destruction of the digital age, unable to transition into the 21st century. The company's downfall became a textbook case of innovator's dilemma. Create something so new it threatens your core business, and you might shelve it, only to let competitors reap the rewards. Even Steve Sassoon, the man who started it all, has reflected on Kodak's fate with a mix of pride and poignance. He remained at Kodak into the 2000s, watching as the digital revolution unfolded. It might seem odd that Kodak built the first digital camera, but didn't claim it, Sassoon mused. We had the technology, we just didn't have the business plan for it. In 2009, Sassoon received the National Medal of Technology and Innovation, honored for his early work on digital imaging. A bittersweet moment, as his employer was already in decline. If you ask him whether he knew his little toaster-sized device would change the world, he'd laugh and say he was surprised it happened so fast. In truth, no one at Kodak in 1975 imagined how quickly digital photography would evolve, but by failing to even imagine it, Kodak sealed its own fate. Kodak's first digital camera was a marvel of innovation and a warning. The company pioneered the future, but was too afraid to pursue it, ultimately falling victim to its own invention. The tale of Steve Sassoon's 1975 camera isn't just tech history. It's a cautionary saga of how visionary ideas can haunt those who ignore them.